Extinction Rebellion is doing the October Rebellion, and it's going to be what's called a movement of movement situation. And I'm going to go through some reasons why this is a good idea, because it's a little bit confusing and a little bit complicated. It hasn't been done before, and usually, it's a movement, does a demonstration, it's like, great, and then another movement does a demonstration, great. But when things really get going, movements join together. And it's also could be useful for people in other European countries, or countries around the world who are thinking about combining with other movements. So it's not just Extinction Rebellion, it's other people coming together because we've got this massive crisis. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the climate crisis, because whenever you start talking about anything, unless you've got that at the forefront of your mind, it often doesn't make sense. So just two small things just to sort of get us into that space. As people probably know, I think it's the top of the UN guy, I forgot what it's called, the General Secretary, right? He's saying, a year or so ago, we've got 2 years, so we've got approximately a year to substantially be reducing carbon emissions. Otherwise it's over, that's the implication. So it's a total emergency, and carbon emissions went up, 2.7% last year, so it's all going wrong, and it's all hands on deck, okay? And in case you don't think it's totally serious, there's another little thing that came out the other day that I want to mention, which is they've done this climate sensitivity thing, and they've worked out that when the CO2 parts per million goes up to 560, which is in 20 or 30 years time, which really isn't that long, it's going to be 5 degrees locked in. This is the new science coming out of all these independent sort of research institutes. 5 degrees centigrade, well, according to a major scientist, that's going to be 1 billion people left on the planet. That means 6 or 7 billion people have been slaughtered, starved to death. What can you say? This is what the science is saying. So that leads on to this realization. This is the big realization, isn't it? Which is, this is not an environmental issue. I hate it when people say it's the environment, it's a little thing over there in a box that is being dealt with, or not, as the case may be. This is a threat to the very basis of our civilized life, for want of a better word. This is what David Attenborough said, wasn't it, at the COP? End of civilization, right? What does that mean? What it means is social collapse. What does social collapse means? It means it's the end of everything progressive. So the biggest threat to everything progressive is now the climate catastrophe and ecological breakdown. And in the next 10 years, 200-300 years of social progress stands to be thrown away forever. So those millions, tens of millions of people all around the world that have fought for workers' rights and women's rights and civil rights and a decent society, that's all going to come to nothing. And I think what's sort of happening all around the world is people in all these progressive moments are realizing that it's going to be a complete failure. We're going to completely fail in that project. And hopefully, or increasingly, that's creating a sense of humility, a sense of people going, if we don't work together, we're going to die together, which is a title, hopefully, of this little talk. So what Extinction Rebellion is trying to do is capitalize on that, if that's the right word. Say, okay, so facts are facts. If we don't sort this out or try to minimize its effect, it's over for all these progressive movements. So we need to get together in a new sense of solidarity and humility and say, look, we've failed up to this point to prevent this massive threat, and we can't afford to fail going forward. And what that means is we have to start working together. So what I want to do is just go through that a little bit concretely. And I said this 2 or 3 years ago in a video, is what the climate crisis means is the end of workers' rights. That's what social chaos means. Social chaos usually means fascism or some decentralized, complete hell, right? So it's going to be the end of workers' rights. It's going to be the end of women's rights.
It's going to be the end of animal rights. It's going to be the end of civil rights. But it's not just that, of course. It's like there aren't going to be any workers anyway. There's not going to be any women. There's not going to be any minorities. People are going to be starving. So it's the most, beyond bad situation for all these particular orientations. And then this has an implication for the left more generally, let's say, which is, the idea I've got of saying to the left is, the rich and powerful have been robbing us for 30 years, and now they're going to kill us. They're facilitating our deaths. There's nothing particularly unusual about this. Elites facilitate the deaths of their people quite regularly during history, right? So it's just happening again. So it's like a massive wake-up call to the left that it's not, austerity, the oppression of peoples, that's really terrible. And then on top of that, there's this project to eliminate them, right? This is a genocidal project. It's happening willingly, knowingly, nothing's happening about it. They don't want to do anything about it because they're making too much money from it. So it couldn't be worse. But I think there's a bigger thing going on, which is it's a threat to something a lot deeper than just the left and progressive movements. It's a threat to the whole sort of, what do you call it, the whole movement in history towards something semi-decent. It's a threat to universal values. It's a threat to the very way of life of billions of people. So in that sense, there's an opportunity and a need to create a universal movement, which isn't just that sort of, left bloc type thing, but it's more like it's reaching out to all those other groups. And in a way, a sort of, an example of this is the Popular Front, I think it's called, in the 1930s, or basically the alliance that happened to oppose Hitler as we went into the 1940s. And that included everyone from conservative Catholics, liberal conservatives, liberals, socialists, communists, people of no political affiliation. But all those groups came together in Europe to say, this is beyond monstrous, what Hitler is doing. And that's what we need today. And obviously a lot of those people hated each other, obviously had really different ways of looking at the world. But at a certain point, they realised if they didn't come together and resist the monstrous evil of Nazism, they're going to be dead. That was going to be the end of everything, all their values. So it's the same today. So we need this new realism, this new maturity, this new seeing the situation as it is. Because if we don't do that, we're going to be dead, right? That's it. It's going to be over. And if we believe the science, we've got 10 years. Maybe it's too late already. Maybe it's 20 years. Who cares, right? It's all systems go. Okay. So I think what that means is reaching out to other groups as well, and even groups involved in other issues. So for instance, like two critical groups are farmers, right? There's going to be no land. You're not going to be able to grow on the land. So we need to reach out to a conservative, traditionally conservative group like farmers, because they're shitting themselves too. I mean, I'm a farmer. I know farmers are shitting themselves. I mean, again, you don't need to genius. You just look at the science, right? You're not going to be able to grow food or keep animals beyond 10 years. And then, small business people. Again, I run small businesses. It's the same sort of thing. If you're a small business person, who's going to be the first people, to go bankrupt? Well, no one's going to be rescuing small businesses. When you have extreme weather events and you count all the logistics collapses, then that's the end of your business, right? No one's going to be running after you, bailing you out when you go bust. So this is like a massive threat. It's the biggest threat to small-scale business people. And then there's faith groups, Christian church, Muslims, Jews, all these groups traditionally quite neutral, in terms of politics. But what's happening with the climate, and this catastrophe is a complete violation of their entire faith. There's no question about that. There's no religion that supports the destruction of humanity, right? And it's the same, of course, with Hitler, brought all the churches together and what have you. So it's the same thing. So we need to be reaching out to all these different cultural groups as well. So Extinction Rebellion's sort of idea of
movement of movements. It's not just, hey, the usual suspects, let's do a march, you know. No. It's got to be bigger than that. It's got to be like reaching out to all these people who, you know, you're not quite sure about them, but, you know, the days are over when you can be snotty about it. It's like you've got to go to the churches, you've got to go to small business organisations, you've got to go to farmers groups and say, hey, you know, here's this universal message. It's all over for all of us unless we actually get our act together. So, and I think the last thing is there's an overall theme here, right? I mean, there may be some groups that aren't actually particularly concerned primarily with the climate catastrophe, right? There might be some groups who are concerned more with the whole austerity situation, you know, like knife crime groups or, you know, community groups that have been neglected in the inner city and what have you. But they need to be welcome too, because there's a bigger narrative here. And this narrative is the governing class, the political classes, are not listening. They haven't been listening to most of the population for several decades because, as we all know, they're in the grip of this neoliberal, corporate, manic sort of make loads of money for the 1% situation. So in a way, there's that coming together of these two big narratives, which is the rich and powerful have been robbing us all for 30 years. That's what 80% of the population agrees with. And secondly, now they're going to facilitate our deaths. So we need to bring together the groups who have been working for, you know, decades on trying to fight this neglect and exploitation, and the newer groups who are coming in for the climate crisis, as you might say. And again, bringing those together. You know, it's tricky, it's difficult, but in a way, this is the message. Because at the end of the day, the climate crisis is primarily a crisis of democracy. It's a crisis of government. It's like, we want to live a decent life, we don't want to die, and what's happening? The governing class is saying no. So that's no good, right? What more can you say? All right, so that all sounds great, doesn't it? It's like, yeah, sort of, that's good. And obviously going to be a little bit difficult and we can all go away and agree. But that's not what Extinction Rebellion does, right? Extinction Rebellion is about rebelling in actuality. So we've got to have a practical plan here. So what we're working on is bringing together a lot of groups, movements, networks, whatever you want to call it, in the autumn, in October. And practically what this means is a number of different sort of mobilisations. So the sort of classical idea here is all the movements come together and they occupy different parts of the city. This is the civil resistance model. Erica Chenoweth, Why Civil Resistance Works, if you want to read the book, she talks about this. You know, at the end stage of a regime, everyone starts going together because they're just fed up beyond, you know, the imagination of what's going on. So that's one thing that can happen. For instance, we've got animal rights people coming. They may take a roundabout or two, and as people may know from April, we're taking different parts of the city. People are going to go there, they're going to sit in the road, they're going to put their tents up, they're going to have a stage, they're going to have boats, they're going to have, you know, music, you name it, all the cultural things. So the idea is, you know, there's going to be different sites which are to do with different areas like faith groups or the environment or whatever. So that's one way of looking at it. But what we're also doing is maybe doing smaller scale things where several different organisations come together. There may be some of the NGOs, they all take a similar space and maybe it's just for a few hours, maybe it's for a day, you know, or maybe there's just going to be an event, or maybe we're just going to have a theme for a day which is going to look at, you know, why we need to reduce animal agriculture, for instance, because of the emissions from that side. Or maybe we'll have a day where we're looking at, you know, the global south and the genocide that's happening there, you know. So there's going to be these different themes, and then different constituencies can come to the fore. So that's what we're working on at the moment. I'm sure what people are thinking is, could be a big disaster, right? Because everyone knows over the last 30 years, one of the things about different political groups is they all think each other are crap, right? And it could really easily go wrong. You know, everyone's got a reason for why they're better than anyone else, you know. But I've got a little example is, we had a meeting with a bunch of animal rights organisations, and all these organisations have been, you know, quite critical about each other in the past.
But we did this quarter of an hour talk, what a lot of people have probably seen who watch this video, where you just go, bang, it's over. If you don't get this sorted out, it's the end of everything. And all these organisations are looking a bit, shocked as people are when they finally get to know what's going on. And then they all started saying, well, how can we work together? So we've got evidence already that this shock does create this space for cooperation. But there's something else, I think, positive to be said about this, is that, a lot of people argue with each other about ideas and what have you. But when they're actually doing things together, they discover their joint humanity. And I think that's what happened in April. Lots of people sat down together in the street. They found solidarity and community. And afterwards, a lot of people were going, that was the best 2 weeks of my life. So my prediction, personally, could be wrong. My prediction is that when you get these different groups, like farmers and vegans, they've got very different perspectives, a little bit scary. I'm a farmer and a vegan, so I sort of see both sides of it. But at the end of the day, when you're sitting down in the street and getting taken off by the police, it's like these things don't matter that much. And I think what could and will hopefully happen in October is people, through that common resistance to this death project, people will find that connection. And that connection, that emotional connection, will be so much more important than our particular cultural and political and social backgrounds, right? And this is the great hope, I think, over the next few years, is people have a choice, to slaughter each other out of self-righteousness, that group's responsible for it, or we're trying to protect ourselves from that group. We could go that way, or in humility, we'll actually come together and realise, we've totally failed in the past, and now we're coming together to actually make the best of what we can do. And that's the plan. Thanks.